Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I wanted to touch on the controversy surrounding Unity's pricing changes that were announced on September 12th, and why the engine maker's new runtime charges have the potential to seriously harm the indie development scene. An obvious but necessary disclaimer before we get into the meat of the video. I am not a game developer. I don't know how to code, I don't know how to create games, and I'm certainly not qualified to speak on this issue from a technical perspective, other than the very limited knowledge I've gleaned from a bit of research and seeing other, much more qualified individuals speak on this issue. I'm simply a guy who loves video games, with a soft spot for the indie scene in particular, and who doesn't want the next generation of gaming surprise success stories to be stifled by one company's greed and disregard for the community that has sprung up around their product. For those who may be unaware of exactly what's going on here, a brief recap is in order. Unity, a major game engine used by numerous developers, with widespread adoption by many indie studios thanks to its ease of use and comfortable learning curve, announced that on January 1st, 2024, they would begin charging users of their product a Unity runtime fee. In layman's terms, this means that depending on how much money a developer makes off of a title built using Unity, and how much that particular game is installed by consumers, the studio, or person in a lot of cases, that created the game will be on the line for these new runtime charges. While this might not sound like a huge deal, in practice, it means that many smaller studios and one-man band operations could end up footing a massive bill if their game blows up exponentially, like, say, a little-known title by the name of Among Us did back in 2020. Plenty of well-qualified developers and gaming figureheads immediately flamed Unity after the announcement went live, not only for having the audacity to implement such an anti-consumer pricing structure, but also for the obvious lack of consideration when it comes to loopholes ripe for exploitation by bad actors. What if someone sat at a computer and downloaded, uninstalled, then reinstalled a game over and over and over again? According to the blog posts, each event in this case would count as a hit against the developer, putting them at risk for literally being install bombed out of business. Unity eventually walked this back to where only initial game installations count towards their pricing thresholds, but they had originally planned to count every download on every device, whether it was a fresh install or not. Absolute madness. How about piracy? Oh, that's right. Game devs are on the line for that too. Don't worry though, according to Unity, they're happy to work with any developer who has been the victim of piracy so they are not unfairly hurt by unwanted installs, which really means that you're at their complete and total mercy. No reason to question whether they'll do the right thing in these cases, right? But hey, at least they won't charge you for charity bundles that include your game. How benevolent of them. What about subscription services like Game Pass and PS Plus? Thankfully, developers aren't on the hook for those installs. Just Microsoft and Sony, who I'm sure are thrilled to hear they're now responsible for handling these costs. The fact that Unity believes the companies behind Xbox and PlayStation are just going to foot the bills in these cases is, quite frankly, hilarious. The icing on top of this cake was that Unity's terms of service were retroactively updated on their GitHub page, seemingly in an attempt to obfuscate what conditions consumers are bound to when using their products. Not shady at all, right? Along with calling out the obvious downfalls of this system, plenty of developers wasted no time in stating that, if these changes did in fact go through, they'll pack up shop and move over to another game engine instead. Studios like Innersloth, Megacrit, and Massive Monster, along with publishers like Devolver Digital, all panned the announcement, with some going so far as to say they'd halt their current development plans in Unity entirely if this pricing isn't reverted. The fact that small-scale developers with limited resources would rather scrap all of the work they've done on their unreleased games, multiple years of effort in some cases, and move to a different engine speaks volumes about just how badly this pricing structure would hurt them, and what they'd be willing to sacrifice in order to escape its clutches. With almost every major indie studio and publisher coming out of the woodwork to jointly criticize this decision, there's no doubt in my mind that it really is just as bad as it sounds. And even I, who struggles with math at the best of times, can see how developers being financially penalized for producing a successful product is a recipe for disaster. Plain and simple. If you're an indie game enjoyer like I am, you've likely played dozens of titles created using the Unity engine, whether you realize it or not. From wonky adventures like Cult of the Lamb, to sprawling RPGs like Pillars of Eternity, to RTS adventures such as Homeworld Deserts of Carrick, some of the best hits from the last decade have been the result of devs working in Unity to create incredible gaming experiences. Plenty of your most notable and beloved platformers, exploration adventures, and emotional sagas have been the product of Unity development. The head-bashing difficulty of Cuphead and Hollow Knight, the quiet and often unsettling exploration of Subnautica and Outer Wilds, the roguelike phenomena that are Risk of Rain 2 and Slay the Spire, and the quiet interpersonal reflection of Gris, one of my favorite games of all time, by the way. If you've enjoyed any of these titles, you know how instrumental this game engine has been to the indie scene. The most recent example of a smashing success made in Unity is Sea of Stars, developed by Sabotage Studio. This retro turn-based RPG smashed its yearly sales goal of 250,000 units in its release week alone, an incredibly impressive feat for such a small group of devs, and potentially not possible without the use of this game engine. While many of the biggest indie hits from the last decade were developed using their products, plenty of games tied to established IP have been made in Unity as well. Ever heard of a little game called Hearthstone? The one-time king of digital CCGs was made using Unity, along with others in the genre like The Elder Scrolls Legends, and a more recent, and just a little popular newcomer to the scene, Marvel Snap. Nothing to worry about when it comes to pissing off those IP holders, right? Were you one of the millions of people sucked in by the Pokemon Go craze back in the late 2010s? Does Escape from Tarkov ring any bells? The popular extraction shooter that's dominated its genre for the last 7 years? Ever built a base in Rust with your friends, or gone toe-to-toe with opponents in COD Mobile? Well, all of those games and more were made by devs using Unity products to bring these massive franchises to life. While Unity has garnered a reputation of being the go-to option for indie studios, there are plenty of heavy hitters using their products as well, and I'm sure these massively successful companies are equally displeased about the impact these runtime fees will have on their bottom lines. All of this is to say that, without the Unity engine, many of the greatest hits we've been blessed with over the last decade might not exist. And the fact that some of the biggest names in the space are seemingly set to abandon the engine completely has me more than a little worried for the indie scene's future. Let's assume that Unity remains unreasonable and decides to move forward with the pricing changes set to take effect next year. What will the indie landscape look like when many existing studios, up-and-coming operations, and students learning to use the engine feel compelled to abandon ship? Firstly, the pipeline of up-and-coming talent could take quite a hit. One of the touted advantages of Unity is that it's easy to learn, and many students and independent devs picked up the product for that very reason. If these individuals suddenly drop their knowledge and move to another product, even taking some of what they learned with them, they will still have to familiarize themselves with what working in another engine looks like, not to mention redoing whatever work they've completed thus far. Second, we could see a swath of delays as studios shift their products to other game engines, or scrap existing work entirely. We've already seen announcements from the likes of Megacrit confirming they'll migrate their upcoming game, and Innersloth have strongly hinted at a similar move if push comes to shove. While there will certainly be new indie releases in the coming years, and many of those are certain to be bangers, it would be a shame for some of the best studios in the space to put their work on hold while they switch up engines, but totally understandable and justifiable in the face of the alternative Unity has presented. No, this isn't going to kill off indie gaming and be the death of the genre, but it could have serious and lasting ramifications on that part of the gaming industry. How many excellent titles are in development right now that we know nothing about, or that already exist but have yet to reach their ultimate audience? What happens when a developer is given the choice between suffering a painful and potentially unsustainable loss of revenue, or scrapping the time and effort they've put into learning the ins and outs of one engine because they've been forced to adopt another? How many small outfits or individual devs working on passion projects will feel inclined to give up, throwing away all of their time and effort, shutting down what could be indie gaming's next big hit, because Unity's pricing model isn't sustainable for their financial situation? When I think back to the list of games I mentioned earlier, full of excellent titles that have left a lasting mark on not only myself, but millions of other players, I'm left wondering if the next Among Us, Risk of Rain 2, or Gris is out there right now, but will never see the light of day thanks to Unity's greed and blatant exploitation of their customers and community. The indie space has drawn in countless players throughout the last several years, in large part due to the escape it provides from an often hellish AAA gaming industry. With the biggest budgets, established workforces, and plenty of cash backing them up, AAA studios have put out plenty of incredible titles over the last decade. Games like God of War Ragnarok, Tears of the Kingdom, Elden Ring, and many more would not exist without the backing and support of the massive companies behind their development and publishing. On the flip side, you have some of the worst examples of what corporatized gaming has to offer. The loot box debacle that was Battlefront 2's release, Cyberpunk 2077's ungodly hype cycle that resulted in one of the most underbaked launches we've seen in gaming ever, or the insistence on shoehorning battle passes into every new multiplayer game, almost all of which happen to follow the wonderful and not at all flawed live service delivery model. The video games industry has become a massive behemoth, and a large segment of that monstrosity is now owned and operated by publicly traded companies that are beholden to their shareholders, resulting in a laser-sharp focus on cutting costs, increasing profits, and squeezing every last dollar they can out of the very consumers they provide those products for. What I see in Unity's new runtime fee, a pricing change implemented by a publicly traded company, beholden to its shareholders, is, at its core, the invasive tendrils of corporatized gaming seeping their way into the indie scene, infecting it with the same greed and wanton disregard for its well-being that we've seen time and time again in the AAA space. Does the company's CEO, John Riccitiello, care if this new pricing decision ruins small development teams and kills off hundreds or thousands of passion projects being worked on by people who simply love making games for the sake of sharing them with other people? Considering he once referred to game developers as idiots for not monetizing their products more heavily, I'd say the answer to that question is pretty clear. Will Unity pull an about-face and walk back these changes in the next 3 or so months? Who knows? My heart would like to say they'll see the error of their ways, but my brain and gut are both telling me not to get my hopes up, and I have a sad suspicion that they might be right. Regardless of the ultimate outcome, I wish nothing but the best for each and every studio and developer affected by this terrible decision. I stand with you in solidarity against these greedy practices, and I look forward to playing as many bangers as I can over the next however many years, made in Unity or otherwise. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more gaming content, and let me know your thoughts on the Unity pricing situation in the comments below. You're a real one, and I appreciate you. Catch you later, homies.